And suddenly, they were gone. For more than half a century, the Assads ruled Syria with an iron fist, seeing off uprising, plots, and a civil war. But in less than 2 weeks, encountering little resistance, an Islamist-led rebellion managed to swoop into Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and now Damascus. We'll ask why. We'll ask why now, and we'll ask what to make of Abu Muhammad al-Julan, the one-time jihadist who's groomed a more moderate image in the past weeks and months and made alliances with Syria's other rebel factions, including the Kurds. Why this victory at this time? Why the defeat for Bashar al-Assad, now exiled in Moscow? What's next for a former Ottoman dependency come French protectorate that's only known dynasty and dictatorship for most of its citizens' lives? Today in the France 24 debate, the fall of the House of Assad. With us, she's a native of Homs, Syrian journalist in exile, Nama al-Alwani. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Should I say congratulations?
So yes, you should, actually, okay. Especially for Homs.
All right. Also with us is Aghiad Ghanem, Franco-Syrian lecturer at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. You were with us last Wednesday. Seems like 1,000 years ago.
Exactly, that's right.
Want to welcome as well, good to see from Rome, Emma Suleiman, former spokesperson for the Syrian National Coalition. That was an opposition umbrella group. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. It's been a while.
And before we go to our panel, we're going to be going in a second to France 24's James Andre, who is in the Syrian capital. Just a few weeks ago, Bashar al-Assad was in Riyadh attending a summit with Arab leaders. Those were images of less than a month ago. Now, he's a political exile in Moscow. The future may be uncertain, but for now, it's heady days in Damascus. Nicholas Rushworth has more.
Rebel fighters entered Damascus unopposed on Sunday, ending decades of Assad family rule. The top rebel commander, Abu Muhammad al-Golani, spoke at a mosque in the center of the city, calling for Syrian security forces to respect the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad.
I hope that everyone who carries a weapon will go to his base and commit to his division, battalion, or brigade. We will not accept or allow the chaos of arms appearing or firing on the streets in any way.
Just hours after Assad fled, some Damascus residents were taking selfies in his house as well as in the presidential palace compound. Rooms were ransacked.
50 years of injustice, insult, poverty, war and electricity cuts. Thank God after 50 years we were able to remove Assad's family from ruling. God willing, Syria is moving towards democracy.
People around the country celebrated. Some toppled statues. Gunfire was accompanied with shouts of "Syria is ours and not the Assad families." Islamist-led rebels are now in charge amid a flurry of questions about what will happen next in Syria.
And before we ask what will happen next, let's go to France 24 senior correspondent James Andre in Damascus. How's your Monday been?
Well, my Monday's been amazing, if I may, because this morning I was in Beirut, Lebanon, and we managed to make it to Damascus by tonight on a road that was actually completely open. The first surprise when we arrived at the border itself, where we noticed that there were absolutely no soldiers from the outgoing regime. There were simply some militiamen greeting those returning to their country. And there we saw some scenes, some very emotional scenes of, men who'd not been in their own country for over 10 years step out of their car and prostrate and kiss the soil of their country at a moment where, they were able to come back for the first time. We met with several of them, one of them telling us that he was rushing back because he wanted to find his father, who was at Sedna prison, one of the most infamous prisons here that is known for torture. he was hoping to find his father. It's disappeared years ago. Another one was telling us that he wanted to be reunited with his brother and his mother. His mother he'd not seen for 12 years. His mother who'd been put in prison because his activism abroad. So you can imagine what that is, how tough these lives of these people have been. And then as we were driving towards central Damascus, well, what we discovered were groups of young people destroying all the portraits of Bashar al-Assad and all the signs of the regime, pulling down the former flag of the country, the one with 2 stars, some replacing it already with the new flag, the one with 3 stars. And then as we arrived at the actual center town here, well, what we discovered was a huge amount of cars and people around the Umayyad square. They were all tooting their horns, firing in the air, dancing on an old tank, a former tank of the Syrian army. A lot of them telling us that, well, they were full of hope. What we really noticed that these people were telling us that, well, for them it felt kind of irreal, unthinkable, that within 72 hours the regime they thought was so powerful and so tough and had such an iron grip on the country was actually gone. And that, of course, was very impressive. We also met one of the warlords, if you will, who came down from Idlib with his forces to march on the capital. Now, he was telling us that he did not face much opposition at all, that most of the soldiers that put their guns down and let the rebels pass. He also said that he was hoping for the current chaos as he saw it. He didn't want to see all this celebrational fire in the center of the city. It was soon to be a whole story. Now, we've heard a lot of things about decisions that have been made by the new rulers of Damascus, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Local media is saying that indeed they've taken some decrees in order to ask their fighters to let journalists work freely, including those who were Syrian journalists who work for media close to the former regime, also telling them to leave women alone and to let them dress as they wish. So it was a very impressive day, an incredible Monday, if you will, and of course a real piece of history written in front of our eyes.
And just briefly, one final question for you, James. There was some shops where you saw reports that remain shuttered. Some people still nervous as to what may unfold.
Well, of course, people are nervous. It's not very obvious who is actually in control, in all fairness. Of course, these militias, these have arrived in town very rapidly. Obviously, it's difficult to reorganize everything. And actually, it's interesting to see the latest news that's coming out of Damascus tonight. According to rumors in the city, but pretty solid ones, Al-Julani, who is the head of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, had dinner tonight with the former outgoing Prime Minister Jalali, who has already said that he was willing to have a peaceful transfer of power, that he would not flee the country, and that he wanted the new rulers to be chosen by the Syrian people. Well, we have names that have kind of come out. There is indeed Hatam Mana. Now, he was exiled in France. He's a potential prime minister. We are told here he's a moderate. He was part of the opposition at an early stage. Also, former prime minister who actually stepped down and left back in 2012. That is Riyad Hijab. He is also being talked about. So these are moderate figures. That would be a sign of opening, if you will, from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. But of course, for now, it's very difficult to know. What we are hearing in town, though, is that there could be some ceremonies of transfer of power tomorrow to a newly formed government. But we'll have to see if that materializes.
All right, early days. James Andre, many thanks for that live update from Damascus. That's the situation in Damascus. I want to ask you, Nama, have you been on the phone to your loved ones over in Homs?
Yes, for many of Syrians, I don't have family there, but I only have friends and people that I know. They are super happy. They are waiting for this moment for a long time, for 13 years now. And they are celebrating with the flags and taking pictures, taking selfies with especially with the clock, the big clock in Homs. And they seem very happy, very optimistic. And even for us, it's the same feeling.
Nama, you're the only presidents you've ever known in your life are called Hafez al-Assad and Bashar al-Assad.
Yes, for Syrians, like it's the most cases like people died without knowing the future of Syria, but we are lucky to see the new opposite episode of Syria after Bashar al-Assad. So I consider myself lucky.
Ayad Ghanem, you think back today to, 13 years ago, and a 13-year-old boy who'd written some graffiti gets picked up, gets roughed up, and dies, and from that comes a civil war.
Yeah, exactly. That's the very tragic story of the civil war in Syria, to which, of course, the Syrian regime is the first to be held responsible. The way they decided to deal with the popular demonstrations asking for more social rights, democracy in 2011, and the decision that Bashar al-Assad and his power and his regime took to crush these movements, to send the armies to Syrian cities, that's what started the civil war. It evolved in a very bloody way, and of course, today we are witnessing the last evolutions of this period, which makes me say that we are, yes, witnessing a political transition, but also we are in need of a conflict resolution, still a conciliation between the different parts of the country. Everything is to be done.
Everything is to be done. Emma Suleiman, you have been a guest in this studio throughout, and it was at times when, at first, there was a lot of hope, and then when it became very bloody, and just again, up until just a few weeks ago, it was thought that Bashar al-Assad had weathered the storm. When you think back over those 13 years, what comes to mind on this Monday?
I mean, the first thing is, I still can't believe what happened. Okay, it just happened so fast. People lost hope long time ago. I think as of 2016, 2017, the regime won. So for us and for everybody, we were like prepared for Hafiz Bashar al-Assad, his son, to take power again, just like Bashar took the power from his father. I think everybody gave up and they moved on with their lives, and they built new life. Nobody. It was more than, I mean, it wasn't a dream anymore. 2011 was a dream. We had hope, we had a dream, and then it was dead. So honestly, when I just found out, I wasn't aware of what was going on. I found out, like, I think on the 5th, December 5th, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, we're talking to each other, and I didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I was like, watching the news all the time with everybody, and we just could not believe it. We're like, we had absolutely no hope. We're like, no, it's impossible. They're gonna save him. In 2015, he had 20% of the country only, and he was saved by Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah. And we're like, yeah, no. Until the last minute, until 4 a.m., until people were in the Umayyad Square, and we heard the regime had fallen, we could not believe it. I mean, it's just, we need time to digest really this fact, because as I forgot her name, your guest said, we were born under this regime. I think 90% of the Syrian people only knew Hafiz and his son. We witnessed Hafiz's passing in 2020, and we could not believe it back then. And now it's just hard to believe. It's a shock. At the same time, we're very scared of what's coming.
Very scared because?
Well, because, first, the way he left, there was no transition of power, and it's a complete chaos. And the replacement, I mean, I know people disagree with me, but for me, it's not assuring having any sort of Islamic, fraction back in power, because we know how dangerous they are, even if they're well groomed, today, or they're pretending they came in with the right speech and trying to assure the minority and but I mean, you really cannot trust. You cannot trust them. How would you know? It's just not assuring for the moment. We're happy, but we're so scared at the same time. Of course, we're very happy because we thought this day would never come. but we're so concerned that you don't want to come from one dictator and go underneath another dictator.
You share this concern, Nama, this anxiety?
Actually, yes, I am totally agree with your guest. Of course, for me, I didn't like al-Julani before, especially in Idlib, the way they treated women, like under the government of Julani in Idlib, and didn't like the situation there. Of course, it's not very different between Assad and Julani at that time, but now I think there's like rules to put on this new control of Syria, and maybe like for
because there have been these edicts that have been put out in the last 24 hours over social media to let women wear what they want. And
this is normal for Syrian people. It's like the Julani is something very weird for us. Like for Syrian people, like to dress whatever we want and to act whatever we want. It's something normal. Like I lived in this way. So the agenda of Julani, it's something very weird. For like Syrian people, it's something not acceptable. So I believe like because every Syrian man or woman, it's a leader. I believe like it's gonna be changed whatever we smell or like sense something very weird at every moment.
All right, perhaps a weird moment. Agad Ghanem, obviously Julani is aware of the reticence of much of a country which is a mosaic of different groups. This is your remit as an academic. You study minorities in Syria. What do you think of the messaging in the last 48 hours?
So if you take the last 48 hours, there are some positive signs about how things are going, not just actually from the side of Jolani and HTS, but also the remaining parts of the Syrian regime, the former prime minister, the parts of the army that just left their weapons and left Hama, Damascus without fighting. So
conscripts have just been offered a blanket amnesty.
Mm-hmm, exactly. That's a very strong decision. So if you take the last days, then I see some positive signs sent to the minorities, be there the Ismaili in cities like Salamiyya or Mesyaf, be there the Christians, of course, in Aleppo and the Syrian coast, the Alawites. And what's interesting is that also these minorities, through some of their leaders, traditional, they are also taking part in the movement. It's crazy to see, for example, like in a city like Qardaha, which is the city Bashar al-Assad and his family come from. Even in this city, you have Alawite leaders who released a text today saying that they want to join the national effort towards a new page in Syrian history. So if you take the last days, then there are positive signs. But if you take the last 13 years, now there is a need to assess what has happened and to recall, of course, the story of Julani and his movement, who were affiliated to Al-Qaeda, who committed crimes against Christians, against minorities. And if some justice was to be established in Syria, it should try to find all the people who were responsible for crimes in every side. And that's something very important, I think, for the next steps.
Yeah, you know there's no going back when the Syrian opposition flag, the new one, is hoisted in places like Madrid, but also in snowy Moscow. Moscow, where it's believed that Bashar al-Assad is electing home now. And there you see that flag being raised. Certainly a sign that a page has been turned. Emma Suleiman, you were fully invested at one point in politics during these 13 years. And you saw how difficult, you experienced it firsthand, for all these disparate groups, as mentioned, to coalesce. Are you scarred by it, or do you have a feeling that that experience may inform what's about to happen?
How can I put it? Yes. I mean, if I'm talking about myself personally, I'm completely away from the political life in Syria because I was, and I don't want to go back. It's not place for me. It was so, Assad turned the whole situation into a proxy war, and it was such a complex. It was like a puzzle. You didn't know at the end, from 2016, we didn't know who is who's fighting who. You had the American military bases somewhere, like in one place, the Russian. It was such a mess. On the other hand, the Islamists took advantage and took hold of all the civil movement, and they represented they were the main representative of the opposition. And today this is what we see. We see the liberator after all these years is al-Julani, somebody who is a former al-Qaeda, and in my personal opinion, in my humble opinion, he's a CIA creation. He's the result of, the guy was in prison and after he was in al-Qaeda for 3 months, and then as soon as he's released, he comes and he creates al-Qaeda branch in Syria, which was called Jabhat al-Nusra at that time in 2012, and then he changed that into Tahrir al-Sham because they were fighting each other, etc. So yes, it was a learning curve for me, but it was a learning curve for all the Syrian as well. If I isolate myself from the situation and I talk about what people learned, I think people have learned a lot, not to trust and not to vote for anybody who comes in talking with the name of God. They know that they don't have the key to their destiny. Nobody does in the Arab world. It's like the regional power, international power, settlement. That's what they decide, and this is what happened. This is why it happened this fast and at this very specific timing. It was not like I think it was planned for. And which is why it happened just the next day, right after the ceasefire in Lebanon. It is following a strategy prepared by, I think, the Israelis going bottom up to Iran, one step by another, like starting in Gaza to eradicate Hamas, going to Hezbollah, which was also unbelievable, And now they have to cut all the supply routes to Hezbollah from Iran. Through Syria. So I don't think they wanted to change the regime. They just wanted, probably him to commit, not, to cut ties with Iran, which is what he was doing in the last few months. But because the army came in and his army completely collapsed, he starved the people for the last five years. People were starving. The country had absolutely, the soldiers get paid $30, less than $30 per month. And they have absolutely no faith, no perspective, nothing. They don't believe in the cause anymore. So that's why it happened so fast. But I think people learn, and I really hope. There are positive signs that, from all the different, society, colors of the society, they want to work together and stuff. But as I said, you can never trust the Islamists, because one day they say, they can have the right speech, like especially the Muslim Brothers. And I worked with them. They make, they pretend that, they want to give the minority the rights, that are free, etc. They're modern. But then later on, you see their true face. The mask the mask that is painted now by the mask they're wearing, that, they're they want to give everybody's right, etc. Jolani has a very bad track record in Idlib.
Right, and that was something that was pointed out earlier by the representative spokesperson for the White Helmets, the Syrian Civil Defense, speaking to us earlier from Istanbul, who regretted that this change of power did not happen through a peaceful transition, but maybe there's hope yet. Just to bring home, talk about something that Emma said, because at the same time, there's a mix of domestic rivalries and foreign proxies. The regime, 61 years in power, toppled in just 12 days, less than 1,000 killed, many offering virtually no resistance. This map shows a couple of interesting points, Agad Ghanem. Mm-hmm. First of all, that the prize is that main highway that links north to south.
That's right. Yeah.
Secondly, you don't necessarily see it on the map, but you have Tartus there, which is where there's a Russian naval base. So that's one foreign player, and an instrumental one these past 13 years. You don't see it on the map, on the Iraqi border, there's a U.S. base. They used it, by the way, to bomb ISIS militants in the last 24 hours. So you have still, and there's fighting in the north.
Of course.
Between Kurdish militants and Turkish-backed,
the
Turkish-backed SNA. So this idea that Syria never quite, for what Emma was saying, never quite has all of its destiny in its own hand, that doesn't change overnight.
That doesn't change overnight, but what I am witnessing is that there are two concomitant narratives going. The first one is geopolitical. It's the one you're describing very rightfully. Turkey is gaining more influence in the north, of course, against the Kurds. Russia looks like having secured their military bases in Tartus and Hmeimim.
So they're not leaving, they're staying.
For now, they're near Latakia. Of course, you showed the line, this road, the road of Damascus, right? That was taken back by the Islamist coalition. It is a very strategic one, and actually, this coalition they followed exactly the same strategy as the regime themselves and their allies when they wanted to secure their regime. They secured this road because it's the economic heart of Syria. It's the capital city, Damascus, and it's the key to the Syrian coast, which is inhabited by a lot of minorities, Alawites, Christians, who were supposed to be the supporters of the regime. But that's only one of the two narratives I wanted to elaborate on. The second one is the social one, because yes, everything that you said exists, but the fact that we saw the people rising in different cities in Syria in the last days, in Sueda, where there is a very important Druze community, in Homs, in Hama, the fact that people went in the streets celebrating, it's also a way to show the world, I think, that there was a learning from the Syrian people, growing abilities to analyze what's happening, to see who are the actors at stake. And of course, most of them, they don't trust HTS, and I think they're right to not trust them. But it's not the whole story. The story is also the people going outside and trying to take their faith back from this whole geopolitical story I mentioned earlier.
Let's cross now to Norman, Oklahoma. Joshua Landis is the director of the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Oklahoma. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate, Joshua. It's a momentous day for you, who studied Syria for a good part of your adult life. You just heard Agyad mention how perhaps this is a moment where Syrians take their destiny into their own hands. Your thoughts on this historic Monday?
Yes, I think it's absolutely right. This is a moment of triumph for many Syrians, and one can wring their hands about all of the unknowns, and there are many, about a fragmented country, a new government trying to take control over a country that's broken. But for many, it is a moment of jubilation. The Assad government, which has ruled for 54 years and had really exhausted every ability to satisfy Syrian people. Nobody in Syria had any hope for the future. And now, once again, that hope is restored, and the 6, 7, 8 million people who fled abroad can think about going home. So this is a moment, I think, that for all Syrians to have a moment of happiness before undoubted troubles begin to creep in on the horizon again.
And Joshua, you were with us last week when we discussed the reasons, and you heard Emma Suleiman reference it, the reasons why this has happened so suddenly. A regime falls, and now we have the final number, 12 days. We talked a lot in that discussion about the role or not of Turkey, not as much about the role of Israel, which, as Emma was pointing out, has Iran in its sights and sees Syria through that lens. Your thoughts on what's happened just in the last 24 hours, what with Israeli troops moving into the buffer zone on the Syrian side of the border there, and also the bombing of these chemical weapons installations, they say, as a preventive measure.
Yes, well, Israel played a very important role in destroying much of Hezbollah. And Hezbollah had been a real anchor for the regime, had helped it retake Aleppo, was extremely important. So the absence of Hezbollah was really sapped much of the support away from the Syrian regime. But I want to direct you a little bit towards America's role in this, which was largely indirect, but was very important. Sanctions on Syria helped to starve the government, but also taking the oil and gas, which was used to fund America's Kurdish allies. That oil and gas provided 40% of the government budget before the revolution began. So once America took it away from the Syrian forces, it really beggared the government, and Assad could never rebuild. Once the conflict came to a frozen standstill in 2020, Syrians were hoping for some kind of a dividend. They couldn't get it. Electricity wasn't returned, schools, you name it. The government ran out of money. And in Aleppo, an anecdote will, I think, explain why things fell apart so quickly is that officers were being paid $30 a month and enlisted men $10 a month. And officers would send home their enlisted men, many of them, 4 or 5 from each little unit, because they would take their income and add it to their own in order to feed their families. And so when the rebels attacked, there were really very few soldiers on the front lines, and the whole army had really fallen apart.
And just one final point on this, Joshua. So you're saying that sanctions worked. The Americans who've backed those Kurdish militias who've come under some really heavy fire this Monday, the Turks claim that the SNA has moved them out of Manjib.
Right. And there's tremendous pressure from the new government for the United States to return that oil and gas wells, which are now used by the Kurds, as well as to lift sanctions. And we've heard from Biden that he's prevaricating on that. Trump has said, let's get out. But in the meantime, Jolani, the new governor, the new head of Syria, is going to need money. And he's going to have to start to rebuild, and he's going to have to pay everybody. And the country is facing severe starvation, and most Syrians have nothing to live on. So he's going to need money, money, money.
Nama Al-Awani, your thoughts on where you start and how do you handle all these foreign powers?
Actually, it's much complicated for us as Syrians, for everyone else. It's like after 13 years, it's now more clear for us how to deal with the future, for Syrian future, and also I think this moment is meant to be to achieve the government and to achieve the power from the regime, because I think most of us now are working on themselves and trying to improve themselves to be better for the future of Syria.
What do you mean by that?
For me, for example, I worked so hard on myself. I studied. I worked as a journalist in Syria and in multiple countries, and I'm working on myself. I'm working about educating myself politically and in multiple ways, just to make sure that I'm going to understand and to achieve something in the future of Syria. And I'm not able to understand or to convince myself that I'm going to accept the Islamic power controlling the future of Syria. And I believe we will achieve to some point that all Syrians will sit together to decide the future of Syria. It's just about time.
Agad Kanem, your last trip there was, what, less than a year ago?
That's right.
Younger generation, were they resigned or were they like Nama?
It was very hard for the younger generations to keep hope in Bashar al-Assad Syria until a few days ago and a year ago. You had, of course, the city I come from, Latakia, and where I conducted most of my research as well. You had a lot of young men who were called to the army and who had to go and fight in the army. The others either being exempted or having to flee from the country, not to go to the army. So there was this very hard social situation for the youth in Latakia, and it's very hard to say that there was some hope. A year ago, people were exhausted, and they couldn't bear it anymore. Like seeing the amazing scenes of the Syrian family and their millionaire friends still throwing parties. I remember that from the summer in 2023. People starving. We had 2 hours. They had 2 hours of electricity a day, and they saw people celebrating around the Assad family in the very luxurious hotels of the area. So this was a terrible symbol for the youth at that time. And I could really see from inside how these people who were considered as a pillar for Bashar al-Assad, but who were actually mostly an instrument to his regime, they had totally led him.
And you were saying there were scenes of celebration in Latakia this Monday.
I mean, it's very interesting. Of course, I'm following all my friends and relatives, talking with them in Latakia. First, they were worried. They were very scared about what was happening because, they lived so long time with this narrative from the regime that the day they go out, people would come to kill them. And actually, the people who are coming, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who were formerly Jabhat al-Nusra, they released messages a few years ago saying we're going to kill the Alawites. So they were right to be scared. And now, as they saw how things evolved, and that, of course, there is a little unrest in parts of the country and some difficulties, but it looks like still they want to be part of this celebration. And I see the messages, they are very responsible, people calling each other to unity, to solidarity. Yes, but of course, here and there, you also see messages such as, guys, do you know where I can find bread? There is no bread left. We can't find anything. Guys, are the schools open? What's going to happen? A lot of questions. And of course, I share the same questions.
Yeah. Emma Suleiman, your thoughts on the one hand, for minorities in Syria, the weight of the past and the threats of the past and the sorrow of the past, as exemplified, we saw with those people desperate to find if they had loved ones at the notorious Hednea prison on the outskirts of the capital. And on the other hand, this idea that the country's united against the spoils of the regime that's just fallen. At this point in time, again, I ask the question, is there reasons to be not pessimistic but optimistic?
Okay, there are multiple factors here. First factor is Assad was abandoned by his, most loyal supporters recently because, as I said, Syria was no longer a state; it was a failed state. As Joshua just mentioned earlier, there was no money anymore, no electricity, no infrastructure, corruption, etc. So he was literally abandoned by his supporter. They had no more hope in Assad, but they were also scared because, as we've seen, I mean, remember 13 years ago when I used to sit here and talk about the atrocity and talk about how they will take people hostages. Literally today, it was unraveled to the world. You can see what's inside these prisons, right? And inside these prisons are not only Sunnis. They're people. They're like Christian, Alawite, all types of opposition, regardless of their beliefs or their religion, right? They were not only Syrian. There are Lebanese, Turks, Jordanian. People who have been in prison for more than 40 years, people do not know if their relatives are alive or dead anymore, right? So, of course, I think this is one of the major victory today is the liberation of the hostages. I literally call them hostages, not prisoners. And so far, 30,000, they managed to liberate 30,000 people around that, that much. but there are estimated to be 100,000 more held in secret prisons. And the Julani government issued an award for anybody who can come up with information about the location of these secret prisons, because Assad had more prisons than universities, than schools, right? They found a prison underneath the University of Business, Commerce, or something, right? So they're still looking for all these prisons. So from one perspective, of course, this is a major victory to liberate the prisoners. From the other end, if you remember when Saddam's fall, on the very same day, people were carrying Saddam's pictures, and when the American arrived, they threw Saddam's picture and they raised the American flag, right? So I think this is the same thing happening right now. Of course, people are happy because they don't support him anymore, so they're relieved and they have hope for a new future. But these very same people, they used to accuse us 13 years ago and 20 years ago by being traitors, by working for the Israelis, the American, whatever. And today they're the first one raising the revolution flag, right? Which is not a bad thing, right? Because you want unity. However, they are scared at the same time, because it happened so fast. And as I said, Assad took the government's money. The government had no money before. He starved the people, and he took whatever left. Like few days before, he took all the US dollars that were in the central bank, apparently, and he took the gold and he left. He didn't even take his closest allies with him, like his supporters, his team. He left alone, apparently. Okay, so they feel deceived by him, and they have no choice. They have to join the rest of the Syrian. But if they did this 13 years ago, things would not have been the same for the last 13 years.
Joshua Landis, let me ask you. Hafez al-Assad, who's born from that same Ba'ath movement that brought Saddam Hussein to power in neighboring Iraq. And how will history remember the Assads? Like, how will they, not how will they remember them, but how will they explain this phenomenon, that this dynasty, Joshua Landis, how will they explain that it lasted for more than 6 decades?
Well, it's in many ways, it's a post-colonial regime. France, which occupied Syria during the interwar years, helped minorities in the army who were overrepresented. And then when France left in 1946, those military officers rose through the ranks and were able to take power. And they have held on to power. And those are, in a sense, using the other minorities and their fear of Islamists ruling Syria to cling to power for decades. So this divide and conquer has been an important element of the Syrian, of ruling Syria and trying to keep Syrians together, because Syria is a very divided country, both ethnically and religiously. And that's presented many challenges to rule. And it's going to present the same challenges to the new government in the future.
Nama Al-Awani, how are your friends celebrating? I didn't ask you at the outset.
Actually, they went to the squares, like holding the revolution flags, taking selfies, and like trying to interact with what's happening now in Syria. They are sending me photos and videos for the place that I was born in and I was raised in the street of Homs. And I want to add something. Maybe for me, I'm feeling optimistic because, like, seeing prisoners outside of prison, it's something very touchful for me, because I were in prison in Syria because I was a journalist. And like, if we achieved one thing after the revolution, is by releasing the prisoners in Syria, could be like more than enough for me. Like, I'm talking about myself. I consider myself selfish to celebrate this moment, but for me, it's very, 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 very powerful moment.
A powerful moment indeed. I want to thank you so much, Nama Al-Awani. I want to thank as well Agiad Ghanem, Emma Suleiman in Rome, Joshua Landis in Norman, Oklahoma. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.